All right, call to order. As we begin today's meeting, we would like to acknowledge that we are gathering here today on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and before them, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Huron, and Wendat. We also acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other global Indigenous people that now call Brampton their home. We are honored to live, work, and enjoy this land. Good afternoon and welcome to our meeting of Brampton's Planning and Development Committee. We will begin the meeting with calling the roll for attendance at today's meeting.
Currently online we have Councillors Brower, Medeiros, and Fortini, and in the room we have Councillors Power, Tour, Deputy Mayor Singh, Councillor Santos, and Councillor Vicente.
Thank you. And our next item is approval of the agenda. Does any member wish to add a business item to today's meeting? Okay. Yep. So I got a correspondence 11.2, which is from Doug Jones, Deputy Minister of Transportation, dated May 22nd, 2024. And does the clerk have any updates?
No, just that we did distribute a revised agenda at approximately 12:30 today, and on that revised agenda we had a presentation published in relation to item 6.1. That's a delegation from Sylvia Roberts. We also had added delegations as of right in relation to item 6.2 and 10.1 from Scooty, Moaz Ahmed, and an additional correspondence from the Drew family in relation to items 11.1 and 10.1.
Okay, perfect. So we have a motion by Councillor Santos to approve the agenda as amended. All in favor? Motion carries. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Hearing and seeing none, the clerk will so note for the meeting minutes. Consent motion. Committee, as part of our consent motion process, I will read each eligible agenda item subject to the consent motion, and any member may verbally identify the item to be held for debate during the meeting. Any item not held for debate will be considered as part of the consent motion and voted on for approval. I'll start reading the relevant agenda items, and members can identify any items to be held for debate. 7.1, staff report regarding alternative process to city-initiated secondary plan amendment through precinct planning, Gore Meadow Secondary Plan, Area 56, Ward 10.
Can we defer that, please, to the next planning meeting?
Okay, we would like that deferred. I will bring that back then. 7.2, staff report regarding application to amend the zoning bylaw, Golden Gate Castlemore Plaza Limited, Glen Schnarr and Associates Inc., 4538 Castlemore Road, Ward 10. Okay, that is in consent. Staff report regarding application to amend the zoning bylaw and for a draft plan of subdivision Candicon Limited, Castle Clark Developments Inc., 10201 Clarkway Drive, Ward 10. That is in consent. 10.1 will be held for delegation item 6.2. 11.1 also relates to discussion item 10.1 and delegation item 6.2. 11.2 is correspondence from Doug Jones, Deputy Minister of Transportation, dated May 22nd, 2024, regarding study area for the Highway 413 Transportation Corridor Route Planning Preliminary Design and Environmental Assessment Project Stage 2. Anybody want to hold that? Okay, that is in consent. So I will pass it to the clerk just to confirm the consent motion.
Thank you. On consent, we have listed items 7.2, 7.3, and 11.2 for consideration.
Okay, 7.2. Okay, thank you. So we will approve the consent motion with the deferral of 7.1 to next planning meeting as well. We'll take it as one motion, moved by Councillor Tour. All in favor? Motion carries. Public delegations. Moving on, we have a delegation from Sylvia Roberts, Brampton residents, regarding land use planning around Sheridan College. Sylvia, welcome.
Hello, my name is Silvio Menezes Roberts. I am a resident of Ward 3. I'd like to first off thank Commissioner Ganesh, Henrik, and then for setting up a meeting with staff. And I had a very good and productive meeting with Claudia and Jeffrey. So this is about the Fletchers Creek South secondary plan area. More generally, it's the area around Sheridan College. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of it, and so on here, the general discussion area includes an extension north, part of the southwestern portion of the Brampton Flower Town, the southwestern portion, because functionally this area, if you look at it from a land use planning perspective and how it is being used, that area, most of it functionally orients itself around Sheridan College. Next slide. So staff has been diligently working on revising and updating a number of plans, including the secondary plans attached to the 78, and I believe it was the 84 official plans. This is considered attached to the 1993 official plan and would be considered in your next general batch. If you'll notice, there's a couple of things that stand out. Notably, here Ontario Street is still labeled as highway, or yes, that's like, here Ontario Street is still labeled Highway 10 because the Mike Harris government had not been elected. You'll also notice that Mavis seems to connect north in a roughly straight line to Steeles, which suggests this plan predates the 1990s because by 93, that subdivision was largely in the process of being built out. So generally in planning, 30 years is considered the life of the plan, and this is over 30 years old. So it's due for a refresh. Next slide, please. So this is the zoning from Brampton's online zoning viewer. It's always appreciated to have transparent data like that. The area is overwhelmingly zoned for single and semi-detached housing. Most of that orange is not exactly townhouses, they're link houses with the foundations connected, but the above ground portions not necessarily being connected. 30 years ago, that wasn't a big issue. I'm familiar with this area. This is where my grandparents lived. I spent many Christmases and summers in this area throughout my childhood, so I'm fairly familiar with the area. And it wasn't an issue at the time, but in the past 10 years, the character of the neighborhood has substantially changed, and now it is overwhelmingly rooming houses. So we have a problem where the land use and the actual use of it is completely separate and completely attached. So even if it wasn't 30 years old, this by itself would be a solid reason for updating it. Next slide, please. So I've got two images here. The much bigger portion is from Brampton Transit's official transit map, and that shows that we have over 8 routes plus some subversions of those routes. And then if you look in the upper right, that smaller inset, that happens, it also is served by 4 buses from MyWay, including 3 of the 6 most overcrowded bus routes in MyWay. This is an area that is extremely well served by transit. In rush hour, it gets over 60 buses an hour, so the time between buses is measured in seconds, not minutes. It is very good from a transit perspective, and I know we are currently working on, there's a procedure on, we have the primary, second MTSAs, and then there's the planned MTSAs, and it will be appended after that because we have our statutory requirements. So the recommendation here is that once we have gone through that, and once the planning powers have been downloaded for planning to make it functionally a single-tier municipality, so the region appeal is no longer the approval board, we really should be looking at making this an MTSA and considering that as part of how we replan the area. Next slide. So this is the 2021 census. As I'm sure some of you have heard, over 60% of international students in Brampton are living in what is considered unsuitable housing because it's overcrowded. That was the 2021 census. Next slide. And then in 2023, we had a record for population growth, the highest since 1957. And if you'll note, there's a quote there from a demographer saying no developed country has seen population growth rates this large in over half a century.
Sylvia, you have 30 seconds.
Yes, next slide. except population growth continues to accelerate, and so the city needs to replan this area and significantly plan for more housing. Next slide. So what is to be done? We need to move forward for our lodging houses because we had that in the works and then it disappeared. I don't know what happened. Is there anyone still on the Housing Brampton team? I would like to know that, and this should be included in the budget to plan this out sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank
That's my
you,
delegation.
Sylvia. Anybody have any questions? Okay, we have a motion moved by Councillor Power to receive the delegation. All in favor? Motion carries. Moving on, we have 6.2, delegation regarding bicycle lane implementation retrofit of existing bicycle lanes to align with current guidelines. First, we have Dale Lang. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Singh, members of council, staff, and visitors. I'm Dale Lang from Bike Brampton. Recently, I took the city's gender equity training. I check only 2 of the boxes since I'm a senior and a woman. I started to ride again regularly once I turned 60, and I've ridden over 22,000 kilometers. I've seen this city truly evolve from the sleepy suburbia that we moved into in 1977. These images that you see here are becoming familiar in our bike lanes. Next slide, please. When I started cycling, we had only 1 bike lane on Rutherford Road. It went from nowhere to nowhere. We had a moderate trail system with few signs. During the past 11 years advocating for Bike Brampton and 9 years volunteering on the Cycling and Active Transportation Advisory Committees, I have witnessed the development and rollout of this amazing network. People can now ride directly on good roads to get to their destinations. Every time we put in a bike lane, buffer it, and on major corridors, barrier protect it, we encourage more of the hesitant folks to choose cycling. Last Thursday, on my way to a tree planting at Dearborn Park, I saw a father and daughter riding on the Howden bike lane. She looked about 7. The expression on her face was one of pure joy. Her father beamed with pride. They belong on the road. If we want a slower recreational pace mixed with pedestrians, our trail system is extensive, made better each year with more depressed curbs, pedestrian and cycle crossings being installed. Next slide. It costs $15,000 a year on average to own a car. That's a nice amount to go towards your mortgage or rent. Many can't afford a car, and certainly not if they have minimum wage. As Enrique Peñalosa, the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia, said, a bikeway is a symbol that shows that a citizen on a $30 bike is equally important as a citizen in a $30,000 car. Hamilton plans to spend $50 million to build 119-kilometer more bike lanes by 2028, doubling their annual construction rate. Edmonton approved $100 million for bike lanes from 2023 to 2026. Council, you are on the right side of equitably balancing the road needs of your citizens with our plans. The mayors of Montreal, London, Paris invested in cycling networks, and all were re-elected. In 2022, the mayor of Ottawa, Mark Sutcliffe, rode the bike lane issue to his election. Next slide. Protected bike lanes reduce collisions and injuries by 30 to 50% according to research. Roads are easier to navigate when everyone is in their place. There can only be peace on the road when everyone has a piece of the road. Next slide. Charolais Boulevard had a problem with speeding and cut-through traffic. When bike lanes were put in for traffic calming, cut-throughs went down by over 5,000 cars per day. Speeding decreased 9.5 kilometers per hour. Wow, the time to drive, the length of Charolais went down by 4%. The biggest wow was that cycling almost doubled. Build it, they will come. Build it safely, it's more accessible for more to come. Next slide. Education is part of building the network. These tax bill inserts explain the economic benefits, what to expect, and how to drive. Next slide. Staff created these educational pieces for posters, trail signs, social media. Bike Brampton developed a series of short safety videos as well as many blog and social media posts. Next slide. Staff produces clear messaging in their notices of construction. They explain what, when, where, and why to residents. The staff briefing correspondence, item 11.1, is very thorough and will give you answers to any questions that residents ask. Next slide. In conclusion, you have a strong staff here in the City of Brampton and a strong cycling advocacy community that are here to help. Call on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, hang on. Through you, Mr. Chair, question to you, Dale, and perhaps some of the other delegations are going to refer to it as well. How long has the Active Transportation Advisory Committee or Cycling Advisory Committee been around for?
9 years.
For 9 years.
And I've been on it the whole time, through the chair, sorry.
Okay. And for the past 9 years, the council predates all of our time here, who are sitting here, I think. Folks, residents in Brampton, and the council at the time of Brampton, were so interested in active transportation and how to share the road accordingly to provide more equitable options to get around 9 years ago. So this is not necessarily a new conversation. And has there been was there that much interest in the past 9 years ago to develop the network that we had to create our own advisory committee to council?
Through the chair, that's an excellent question. There was an interest. And we knew that other communities were doing this. We advocated very strongly to have the cycling advisory even created, to even have a department within planning, and to have a position, the very first position created. We advocated for a committee to be formed, and with the help of Councillor Hutton at that time. And it's growing. Initially, it seems like there's nobody out there. And now, I can remember photographing somebody that I actually saw out on the road, being so shocked that I actually saw somebody. Mm-hmm. And now, it's such a common occurrence that I don't even think twice of it, really. Mm-hmm. And as the networks increased over time, it's obviously encouraged so many more of the people that are very hesitant to come out and use it.
Okay, and because you've been around for 9 years and watching the city grow to where we are now in terms of implementation of active transportation, this slide you have on the screen shows a lot of documents related to policy, planning policy, over many years, and as recent as 2019, when the Active Transportation Master Plan was put together, as well as the official plan, etc. What would you say to folks who think that the City of Brampton is just doing this ad hoc and just putting bike lanes randomly in various places?
Through the chair, this is complex because all these things have built on each other. We started off with a Pathways Master Plan that was actually a pretty good document for a good start. And over time, this has expanded and expanded. And actually, one of the subsequent delegations will touch on these plans in much more detail. But I think that unless you've read every single one of these documents, which quite frankly would take you a great deal of time to read all of them, you couldn't possibly appreciate the complexity of how each one of these has been a stepping stone that's built on the previous one.
Thank you, Dale. I'll wait for the next delegation that talks about these policy documents further, but just to say that it's not come out of nowhere, that city staff and council over the years have provided a lot of direction, a lot of thinking, a lot of planning in the active transportation infrastructure that we have today and into the future. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you. Next is Lisa Stokes.
Good afternoon, Chair Singh and councillors. I'm Lisa Stokes, and I've been a cycling advocate for 10 years, during which Brampton made tremendous progress. 75% of my 13-kilometer trip to City Hall is on bike lanes now, compared to none 10 years ago, and it will be even more later this year. Brampton is making meaningful progress in creating a cycling network. Thank you to Planning and Development for creating a framework of plans that outline a roadmap prioritizing active transportation above the private motor vehicle, and to Council and the previous Council for approving these plans. Next slide. The Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 states that building a network of low-stress, bike-friendly streets is crucial for municipalities seeking to improve road safety, reduce congestion, improve air quality and public health, provide better and more equitable access to jobs and opportunities, and boost local economies and tourism. It is produced by the Ministry of Transportation and provides practical guidance on the planning, design, and operation of cycling facilities. It was first published in 2013 and updated in 2021 for current best practices. This has contributed to some inconsistencies in our network while we wait for older designs to be refreshed. However, today's staff briefing note indicates that the refresh is cheap compared to most road construction costs. Next slide, please. Brampton has many planning documents approved during the last and current terms of council. Cycling infrastructure is a fundamental part of all of these plans. Next slide, please. Active transportation, such as walking, cycling, and micromobility, can help us achieve 3 of the 7 aspirational 2040 vision statements about sustainability, safe integrated transportation choices, and healthy citizens. Next slide. The Brampton Plan is Brampton's official plan as required by the province and guides Brampton's planning decisions. It was adopted last November by this council. It states that the active transportation network creates critical local and regional connections, and that by improving the network, the city can address many challenges, including congestion, commute times, air quality, transportation costs, lack of connectivity, bicycle safety, and recreational access. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It prioritizes trips on foot, on bicycle, and on transit ahead of the private automobile. Next slide, please. In 2021, Brampton Council endorsed 7 guiding principles to help direct the development of a new mobility plan. 4 of the 7 directly relate to cycling. Next slide. Advance multimodal transportation equity. Next slide, please. Integrate transportation and land use planning. Next slide. Protect public health and safety. And finally, improve environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. Everyone should support a shift to active transportation, even if they plan to continue driving. We cannot build enough roads to reduce congestion as our population grows. Active transportation will allow us to move many more people in the same amount of road space without the need for expensive road widening. Only 13% of trips less than 5 kilometers are currently by active modes. If we can increase that to a modest 35%, we can reduce daily car trips by 100,000. That's an eighth of our daily car trips. Next slide, please. The Active Transportation Master Plan was endorsed unanimously by Council in 2019. It states that active transportation presents one of the greatest untapped opportunities for reducing single-occupant vehicles. It focuses on the implementation strategy for building a connected cycling and pedestrian network. To minimize the cost of building the network, it is being implemented with planned road construction, which means that there are short to medium-term gaps, but when fully implemented, the plan will create a coherent network.
30 seconds.
Next slide, please. Additionally, Council adopted Vision Zero and declared a climate emergency, both of which can be helped with a high-quality cycling network. Next slide. Even the parking master plan passed last November states that Brampton should continue to upgrade and expand the transit, cycling, and pedestrian networks to promote modes of transport alternative to the private auto. To conclude, Brampton has an excellent planning framework which prioritizes active modes of travel over the private motor vehicle. Let's make Brampton a more active, equitable city by implementing these plans without delay. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have one question from Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, just a quick question because you mentioned the word equitable. What do you mean by equitable? Because I see the equity office is here. So I just want to make sure, when you were talking about implementing active transportation, what do you mean by making it equitable?
What I mean is that there are a lot of people that can't afford a private motor vehicle, and we know from surveys from the Peel Active the Sustainable Transportation Master Plan that about 60% of people are interested in cycling but are too concerned to get out there and ride without high-quality cycling infrastructure. That is a very sizable part of our population that we are excluding if we don't build a high-quality cycling network.
So when it comes to equity, we need to look at equity also when it comes to public infrastructure, not just equity in terms of access to our recreation centers through a seniors pass or a youth pass and active assist plan, but also equity when it comes to the usage of our public infrastructure, like roads itself.
Absolutely. I mean, it is fundamental in order for us to be able to access the equity of the things that you mentioned, that we be able to get there. And if we don't have a transportation network that allows our most vulnerable to access those programs, then we're failing those people.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we have David Lang.
Chair Singh, members of council, members of staff and the public, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. My name is David Lang. I'm a longtime Brampton resident and a longtime cycling advocate and enthusiast. There was a debate at the May 8th Committee of Council meeting regarding local provincial laws as they relate to bicycle infrastructure and the use of bicycles on Brampton roads and pathways. This presentation is an attempt to bring more clarity to the discussion. Next slide, please. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act, or HTA, addresses required bike equipment, cyclist behavior, and motorist behavior around bikes. Under the HTA, bicycles are considered vehicles with the same rights and responsibilities as other road users. They are entitled to use any roadway other than 400 series highways. Motorists are required to leave a minimum of 1 meter space when passing a cyclist, and cyclists are required to keep as far to the right side of the road as is practicable. Now, in this case, practical is defined as being able to put into practice, which in the case of the road space is interpreted as the cyclist being courteous and making it easier for faster vehicles to pass, but without negatively affecting their own safety or convenience. The distance a rider is from the curb, therefore, is dependent upon several factors, including lane width, road conditions, and rider skill. It is neither required nor encouraged for cyclists to stay so far right that the car does not have to pull into the next lane in order to pass. Neither should cyclists be intimidated into riding in the gutter or dangerously close to the pavement edge. Next slide, please. As for on-street bicycle infrastructure, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act does not specifically mention bike lanes. It does, however, allow for traffic lanes to be designated for the exclusive use of specific classes or types of vehicles, particularly to accommodate slower moving traffic. The Ontario Traffic Manual, particularly Book 18, does provide best practice guidelines for how bike lanes are to be implemented to facilitate safe road user behavior and encourage uniformity of treatment in the design, application, and operation of traffic control devices and systems across the province. Despite the objective for uniformity, the evolving nature of best practice definition, particularly as it relates to bicycle infrastructure, means that traffic practitioners will be challenged to maintain consistency across the network while working within budgetary constraints. Next slide, please. A similar evolution applies to Brampton bylaws as they apply to bicycles. Current best practice and defined norms are substantively different from when bicycle-related bylaws were enacted in 2011. That said, the cost associated with retrofitting bicycle infrastructure to current standards is nominal when compared with general road maintenance and construction costs. So it's more a question about putting the network consistency higher on council agenda as far as budget is concerned. Next slide, please. Perhaps the biggest impact to both the HTA and local bylaws is the exploding popularity over the past few years of e-bikes, e-scooters, and other micromobility devices. Transportation staff have been working with the Active Transportation Advisory Committee on a list of recommendations to update and streamline bike-related bylaws to improve enforceability and reflect current best practice. Council should expect to be provided with a list of recommended changes within the coming months. I'll end by saying that while these changes are challenging, they are not something that should be either feared nor scorned. They are simply a reflection of the maturing of our city as it transforms from what Dale indicated was a sleepy suburb to a vibrant urban center, where alternative travel beyond the car is both necessary to manage traffic growth over the coming decades and beneficial in relation to the health and safety of our population, as well as in mitigating environmental impacts. So I hope this presentation has provided additional clarity to the discussion related to lanes, bike lanes within the Brampton roads. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Santos?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. If we could just go to slide number 3 in the presentation. So there was, you're right, there was a question in earlier this month about whether or not the province regulates bike lanes or if bike lanes is specifically referenced in the Highway Traffic Act.
Right.
So thank you for finding this, because clearly the Highway Traffic Act does address it in an indirect way, as you've pointed out, in terms of having a lane being designated for slower moving traffic, and that a driver shall obey the instructions on the official signs.
Correct.
So if you can elaborate a little bit more on that and that information you found, just in case folks online or here didn't get your point.
Sure. Well, through the chair, thank you very much for that question, Councillor Santos. The Highway Traffic Act, although it doesn't specifically refer to bike lanes, it does refer to elements of being able to manage traffic in a safe way. And so it defines, as it says here, any lane may be designated, any active traffic lane may be designated for slower moving traffic. And it also allows municipalities and others to define specific classes or types of vehicles that can run on those lanes and for their exclusive use. So things like micromobility devices, bicycles, farm equipment in some cases, or other slower moving vehicles can be accommodated with a separate lane. It also can be used for goods movement to define specific lanes of traffic for trucks only. So, it is kind of a catch-all, but it really fits within the strategy of what we're trying to achieve, which is providing road space for all road users in the appropriate fashion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much, David.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, I don't see any more questions, so next we'll go to Barry Lavallee.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to council, staff, and fellow citizens. I'm going to approach this from a very different perspective today. It's going to be a personal appeal. I want to speak as a disgruntled grandfather. I have grandkids. I have daughters that grew up here in Brampton. It has been my adopted home for 40 years now. So very first, I want to start off by saying I want to address the specific reason for me coming here today was when Councillor Vicente rightfully pointed out we have discrepancies in intersections as to how the lanes are treated. Where some intersections, you know, there's unbroken solid lines where the drivers are not supposed to pass, and others there are dotted lines where they can. And the inconsistencies do create confusion at times. However, and by the way, I want to speak to this as a family, okay? I'm not pointing at you and you and you or staff. I'm including myself. We need to do better, okay? We're a community. So the reason for these discrepancies is because the active transportation and transportation department has had zero budget over 10 years leading up to this point. So when you see discrepancies, you get maybe 1 or 2 intersections implemented per year. And during that process, the Book 18 guidelines change, it evolves. So you're still trying to catch up and move ahead with what needs to be done, knowing that there is stuff that's now outdated, but when you got zero budget to go back and fix it and make it right, then yes, you're gonna end up with problems. And we have problems now. So the only way things have been moving forward for the last couple of years is by piggybacking on other road projects. Because again, the active transportation planners and department, they had no budget to work with. So they had to just piggyback on the works of Public Works when they were doing upgrades of sections of road. So when you can only put in sections of bike lane at a time, you're going to get an ad hoc network, an incomplete network. But we're doing it on a dime, okay? Now, I want to explain, I want to get to quickly why we need this. So I'm going to change gears here. So I'm not going to speak to the equity aspect of what I'm saying. I want to speak to the aspect that nobody is mentioning or considering, and that's the economic benefits for the city. Cycling tourism is becoming very, very popular. I don't have numbers to present to you today. However, I can just give you a quick reference. The province of Quebec, through Velo Quebec, estimate that they receive the benefit of $800 million a year due to cycling tourism in their communities. Now, that's a province as a whole. I have to quickly explain to you the culture of cycling tourism. It's not about going to, or people coming to the city of Brampton to see a site. It's about the destination. It's about the ride along the way, meeting with friends. And all you're going out to look for a place for a good butter tart, a good coffee, a good beer somewhere. It's about the ride with friends. Brampton is a gateway between the waterfront trail that runs from Quebec to Niagara Falls and the Greenbelt north of us. This is Ontario by bike. You're not going to be able to see it here, but if you have to go and refer to it, it's online.
You have 30 seconds.
There's a gaping hole in the central Ontario region where there is nothing to come and see. Toronto, Brampton, and Mississauga, out of 11 regions. All of the other regions have something to offer. We are a gateway between the north and the south. We can, if we bring down the proper infrastructure, we can attract people into this city.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thanks so much, Councillor Deputy Mayor Singh. And Barry, you brought up the issue of cost in terms of bringing up some of the inconsistent intersections up to par to the general standard. And staff have sent out a briefing note, which is a part of the correspondence. I'm just going to read that the city has identified 13 intersections that would meet the requirements in terms of the upgrades to those intersections and those inconsistencies to bring it up to par with what we are implementing for 2024. And you mentioned cost, because the briefing note also talks about cost. The cost to upgrade is $35,000. And so when it comes to declaring a climate emergency, creating more equitable access for the city to get around, for residents to get around the city, for, just in general, where the city needs to be going after so many years of planning and strategizing and implementing, to upgrade these intersections at a cost of $35,000. And the briefing note also says that we could do it in parallel to the implementation of existing ATM or active transportation infrastructure already planned for 2024. It is possible to continue, and I believe we will continue to implement that network, because to your point, the only reason why it looks like things are ad hoc, it's because it's not ad hoc, it is absolutely planned,
Right.
the network. The only reason why it looks ad hoc is because of budget constraints. You're right, because we don't have enough money altogether to implement everything in 1 year versus the planned 5 years that it's supposed to take. If we had the budget for it, then we could implement it all at the same time, if we were unlimited in the resources on this plan. But certainly, this briefing note points out very clearly again, and we've talked about it many times on active transportation, the cost for equity, for dealing with the climate emergency, for providing more mobility and options for residents in Brampton to get around, whether that's first mile, last mile to transit, or to pick up something at the grocery store, get to work. The cost is a fraction compared to building roads for cars. And so thank you for bringing up the cost. Happy to, if you want to comment any further on that, Barry, but I would have no further questions after that.
Yes, please, through the chair. So the potential of bringing in tourism dollars can be good for the businesses of the community. Certainly the businesses where there's safe infrastructure where we can route visitors to them in their areas. The city does have an active tourism Ride with GPS tourism account now, and we have developed a 96-kilometer loop of the city. It's a living document. It will change over time and get rerouted to include areas of the city and businesses where there is infrastructure to deliver riders safely through the area. I only got through half of my presentation, but if I can, through the chair, if I may say, I have 30 seconds?
No, we can't, because I cut other members off, it's not
30
fair.
seconds?
No, they're all
Please.
listening, it's not fair. We have to be equitable in our time, please, because I already cut them off, so.
If I may, the delegate is answering the question. Can he at least be allowed to answer the question?
I'm looking at members that I cut off, so I just,
It
wanna
is
be
directly
mindful of
related
that.
to
The cost?
the cost.
Okay.
okay, but please keep it brief.
Right. So to offset the cost of developing this infrastructure, I want to bring, if you don't already know, over here, you have expert manager and director who not only know their jobs well, but they're also active cyclists, and they do touring. They have the spandex in their closet to prove it. So you have both ends of the spectrum, and you have new, fresh enthusiasm in a project manager. All that's needed is for them to have a budget to work with. And the benefits that will come in, the revenue that will come into the city, will offset the cost. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Moaz.
Good afternoon to Chair Singh and the members of Planning and Development Committee, to the audience here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I apologize for not having a presentation. I probably would have, but I found out about this on Saturday. Thanks to Councillor Power and Councillor Santos for telling me that this was really important to get this perspective from Scooty. But before I talk about Scooty and the micromobility program and how all those elements fit in, what I do want to say is I have been doing this for 20 years. Advocacy, community mobility, giving people the equity support that they need to be able to access society and be able to present their best to their community, which gives them most opportunities, whether it's for economic opportunity or social opportunity or just access to the amenities that a city provides. When I look at the infrastructure and the supports that the City of Brampton is providing with the bike lanes, providing with the connections to transit, providing with the micromobility program, what I see is collective enthusiasm to make things better. But I also see that there's also challenges typically with trying to figure out where do those dollars go today, where do those dollars go tomorrow, what should we build off of, what gaps should we be typically addressing, and what problems are we trying to solve? So my only recommendation that I can do here, because I'd really rather just answer questions for you, is to simply say, make sure you're on the same page with what problems you're trying to solve. And I've seen the data, I've seen the presentations, I've seen the reports from staff, I've had the conversations. But what we're really doing is we're talking about getting 9 people or 10 people on council, a collective 20 people who are decision makers to be there to say, these are the problems we're trying to solve, these are the problems we're trying to solve immediately, and this is what we need to do to make that happen. There's an image that floats around. It's a typical profile of a B-17 bomber, and it was basically the image of all the different hits that these B-17 bombers took before they came back to base in World War II. And you would look at that and say, okay, this is the areas that we have to protect, but it's not the areas we have to protect. It's the areas that destroyed the planes, the ones that didn't make it back. You got to look at those. And as an advocate for cycling, as an advocate for community, as a person who runs a business, I will say that the most important thing to do is protect people on the roads as much, as quickly, as effectively as you can. And you have to put that budget there. That's all I can really say. Now, I can give you more details, but that's the end of the day. That's what you need to do. How you do that, the professional staff are there to tell you. How you do that, the advocates are there to tell you. They can tell you from the experience, they can tell you from the knowledge, they can collect all the Book 10 and the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the policies and everything, and put it together for you. But you have to tell them, we need to do this for this reason, and we need to do it now. I'm simply going to stand here and say, increase the budget, increase the toolkits, improve the communication, and simplify it. Don't worry about one particular bike lane as much as the safety of the rider, the safety of the driver, the positivity of the experience, and build from that. I spoke on May 1st saying that Brampton was getting an award-winning micromobility project, and the award was about the transition and building of suburban micromobility infrastructure and making it possible, making it work. And I didn't win that award, but I felt like so proud to be part of that program and to be able to say that I supported that. A young person from Toronto Metropolitan University working with these professionals. Being an award winner is something I'm so immensely proud of. I can't even tell you, almost like if my son were to win the award, I would be that proud. The simple fact is, you are doing something really amazing here. And you could really continue to do a lot of amazing things if you focus less on the details, focus more on the vision that you have, and give them the budget, give them the tools that they need for that implementation. I have some specific ideas, but I'll leave them for questions. But I thank you very much for your time, and I really have to say once again, Brampton is doing something amazing. People are watching, people are learning, and I invite you to continue doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Santos.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming in today. I saw you at the bike festival in the pouring rain. I rode my bike on the new separated bike lanes on Howden. I crossed, well, from Lakelands, crossed the Franciscini Bridge, and then over across Williams, over to North Park on the bike lanes, and then Howden on the separated bike lanes, and crossing over Hanover to Chinguacousy. And it was raining, but I still saw people in the bike lanes, and I saw you, and it was wonderful to see you. In your 20 years of advocacy for cycling, for micromobility, you know a lot. And based on the studies and research and statistics in North America and around the world, what are they saying when it comes to access to active transportation and investments in active transportation infrastructure?
To summarize it just keeping it very, very simple. Make roads safe for people through Vision Zero, and truly take advantage of the untapped potential of cycling with a purpose. Because we've traditionally designed our infrastructure with the idea of cycling as leisure. But cycling with a purpose, and what I mean is a specific community purpose. Cycling as transportation, cycling as access to a community amenity, cycling as the way to connect to transit, is the most exciting and interesting and opportunity-creating aspect of transportation that I have seen in these 20 years. Mm-hmm. And when I first looked at bike share, and when bike share first started to get introduced to this part of the world, 2007 is in Paris, 2010 is in Toronto. And to be able to look at that and say, what can this do with the bike infrastructure that we already have? What can this do for the culture of cycling? What can this do for connecting people to transit? And we're in the process of exploring that. And Brampton is literally in the process of exploring that. So I have data that shows me that people are taking advantage of the shared micromobility program to use the infrastructure that the city has built to connect to the transit system that the city has invested in, to take that transit system and travel regionally, to travel to jobs or amenities or whatever it might be. And I'll just borrow from Barry's point. Actually, this is a really good example. March 9th and 10th, since I'm on the Mississauga Cycling Advisory Committee, I was at a bike show at the International Center, and I spoke to possibly 200 people. And I could tell you that more than 3/4 of them wanted to travel by bike. And I think all of my conversations were talking about, you know what? On April 28th, you're going to have all-day service to most of Brampton. Weekend service. It's an exciting thing because now you can take a GO train from the region and get to Brampton. And then once you're through Brampton, you got the whole of Caledon and all of this cycling infrastructure available for you. And people are out there, and they have the money, and they want to spend it, and they want to go and get that butter tart. And they have the maps, Google Maps, with all the places that they want to go. I have 600 places I want to go on my personal Google Maps. And I'd say maybe only 10% of them are linked to cycling, but imagine it was 50. Mm-hmm. Imagine it was even 20. That would make a big difference. And it would make me very happy because I could go and enjoy life and experience that with my friends, the people that I love, rather than sitting in the car, not being able to look at them because I have to focus on the road.
Thanks for coming to delegate today.
Thank you. Other questions?
All right. I have a motion moved by Councillor Santos to receive all the delegations. All in favor? Motion carries. Moving on to 10.1, which is referred matters. Discussion item regarding bicycle lane implementation. Retrofit of existing bicycle lanes to align with current guidelines. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Power.
Sorry, thank you through the chair, Deputy. I've got some questions from this report that we've all received. I don't know if they want to do it one at a time or go through them and just list them all off, but I've got notes.
How many questions? Few. Yeah, then one by one, so they can respond.
So page 1, contributing to civic sustainability. How sustainable is our current implementation of bike lanes?
Through the chair, through to Councillor Power, if I could just seek some clarification when you're mentioning sustainable, are you looking for information on the degree to which the bike lanes have encouraged active transportation? Or are you looking for sustainability?
I'm looking at the infrastructure, the implementation of the current infrastructure that we have. So if we look at active transportation as continuing to civic sustainability and emphasizing walking, cycling, and transit, how sustainable is our network right now?
So through the chair to Councillor Power, I think what you're speaking to there in that page 1 is an excerpt from the 2040 vision about the objective that the vision is about that mosaic of safe integrated transportation choices and contributing to that civic sustainability. I think when we're talking about civic sustainability, it's much more of a broader societal integration of lifestyle, livability, and all of those things. How do we define that in terms of how much does our infrastructure contribute to that today? I think we still have work to do. But I think if you take a look at the record over the past, ever since we begun implementing the ATMP, and I think you've heard it from some of the delegations today, the amount of infrastructure that we've introduced, we've started to make inroads into that. I think our data, not just from cycling, I think more so, I think from the micromobility, the e-scooters, when we take a look at the infrastructure that we provide to be able to allow people to access transit, that they don't have to drive a car, they can take a scooter and hook up to a trip. We have a bus transit system that has bike racks on it now, so people are able to make those kinds of connections. It's one of those things that's hard to say when you have these visionary objectives that you can ever say that you've achieved it. I think you're always trying to reach further and do better. We're constantly moving towards that target. That's what's guiding us.
So given that we have massive amount of boulevards or larger boulevards throughout the city of Brampton, why wouldn't we implement something similar to Highway 7 in Vaughan for bike lanes and active transportation or mobility?
Through the chair, we are. So the guidance, provincial guidance, sort of sets out parameters of what type of infrastructure gets implemented on different types of road. So every arterial road in the city, Bramalea, Torbram, Williams, Sandalwood Parkway, the plan is to have protected, dedicated infrastructure, or protected infrastructure away from the roadway. What the provincial guidance suggests is that in cases where, traffic volumes and speed don't justify that need to separate a cyclist, then they could share the space or have a designated space. So really it's 3 different sort of streams, dedicated area, or shared, dedicated, and separated.
So if there wasn't a budget constraint, could we do something similar to what they've done in Vaughan?
There are projects that we are working on that will see cycle track. The Huron-Ontario LRT has a separated cycle track. In the case of through the downtown, the Reimagine project has dedicated cycling infrastructure. It's separated a cycle track, much like Highway 7.
Through the chair to Councillor Power, if I could just add to that too. I think a lot of this investment will happen as we begin to implement our transit projects as well. So in the case of Queen Street, with the work that, with the planned BRT with Metrolinx, those kinds of elements come into that design. It's certainly happening on Main Street with the LRT project there as well. Just the one cautionary I would put in there, and it's part of that learning process that Highway 7 in Vaughan isn't necessarily an ideal situation either. The approach there has been a little bit different, and I think that the objective here for us is to try to achieve mode shift over the long term. And what they had done in Vaughan, and you can, they have a facility, a cycling facility there, but you take a look at that boulevard, it's still massive. So from an experience point of view, it's not necessarily ideal, because their objective there was we're going to try to provide everything for everybody. Whereas, the approach that we're taking here, and other jurisdictions will do as well, is that, you're dealing with a 6-lane right-of-way, for example, 6 general purpose lanes. You're then taking away 2 lanes to put in transit, for example. And rationale there is that you're putting in a conveyance that's actually moving more people than there would in those single cars. It's part of that moving that barometer. But Vaughan had made that decision and said, well, no, we're going to keep what's there currently and squeeze in everything else. So you sometimes, it doesn't end up achieving kind of that longer term policy objective. So just a cautionary about what's been done on Highway 7.
So when you're talking about in snowplow or snow removal, right, we're now looking at protected bike lanes where we're putting curbs on roads. We're now having to get different equipment at a massive cost to the city to be able to plow the bike lanes. Wouldn't it make more sense to have something similar like in Vaughan and make it easier and more cost effective, as we've heard all day?
Maybe through the chair, maybe I'll defer to Nelson if he knows more about the operational side, but I think the equipment to actually plow those lanes, I think we currently have. The sidewalk plows are able to do bike lanes. But again, we have the precedent of other winter cities in Canada that receive a lot much more snow than we do that are able to do this. Calgary, Montreal are the ones that come immediately to Quebec City. But I'll defer to my colleague Nelson if he's got any more information on the maintenance aspects.
Through the chair, specific to Vaughan Street corridor and the Howden Boulevard corridor, the intent of that project was exactly this: is to put together a pilot and then test all of the requirements. Much like a lot of area municipalities, London did the same trial. Ottawa, their first versions of the bicycle lanes, was just to test all of these things, whether it's waste collection, winter maintenance, spring maintenance, sweeping. All of those things get tested, through the corridor, and then the intent is to report back to council. Is it a win? Is it a loss? Here are the challenge. Here are the issues. That was the intent of that pilot.
Okay. Page 2, we talked to protected bike lanes and having them use multi-use paths and recreation trails. Which one of our bike lanes currently actually connect to any of our trail systems or valley part lands?
Through the chair, through the active transportation master plan process, we identified a network that's all connected. It connects all of those different types of facility types, including infrastructure that's located along utility corridors, greenways, waterways, as well as on street. So the ultimate goal is a connected network that connects all of those different types of infrastructure. We're just in the process of getting there. Every time we do implement a project, initiatives like the Fix It program that identifies proper crossings and curb cuts, all of those things that are leading toward a fully integrated network.
But we don't have any currently, so there's no curb depressions or any trails that connect to a bike lane currently?
No,
Where?
we definitely do.
Where?
Yeah, so as a part of the exercise East-West Cycling Corridor, we identified a number of curb cuts. Anytime we do a road resurfacing project, typically there's the resource already in place. So there's, a contractor in place that can remove curbs, pour curbs. So those are typically the opportunities that we get to, have curb cuts along roadways that have bicycle lanes.
Which ones specifically? Which roads?
I'll give you a list of them. Can we get, what's that?
Well, you can go on to the next one. It's not in words.
Through the chair, maybe I could ask that if staff could report back on the specifics for the roads that Councillor Farrar is asking for the curb depression and cuts.
Yeah, an email will suffice. Yeah, thank you.
Through the chair, just for clarification, is it regarding curb cuts, or is it just where we're having on-road infrastructure that intersects or leads into trail infrastructure?
Trails and valley lanes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So when we talk about safety and safety of the riders and protected lanes and what have you, have we reached out to emergency services to ask when? So if we're coming down Howden and it's a one lane and an emergency vehicle needs to get through but it's backed up, what do they do?
Through the chair, I don't think we've had those specific conversations with emergency services. However, they have been involved in projects like the East-West Cycling Corridor. The funny thing is, through the industry, the biggest response, and maybe we can get clarification and back to you, is that their response is to vehicle collisions and the amount of, speed-related issues. That's their biggest response when you're dealing with fire and emergency services, from my understanding. So, projects like this that help to, get people out of vehicles is definitely a pro from an emergency services perspective.
But have we approached them about how do they navigate traffic if it's backed up in that specific corridor, Dixie and out?
Not specific to, bicycle lanes and specifically bicycle lanes, but just I know our traffic operations group does, deal with fire and emergency services in a lot of their traffic calming initiatives or their operational changes to roadways, such as speed cushions, narrowings, which would include a bicycle lane.
Okay, page 5, when we talk about solid line and dotted lines. Nelson, I brought this up to you prior. Central Park south of Knightsbridge. Please explain how somebody makes a right-hand turn in that specific corridor. It's solid lines.
Through the chair.
And there's a bullnose at corner of Clark and Knightsbridge to make a right-hand turn, but if you're in the driving lane, you can't make it.
Yeah, I would just ask that perhaps we can get back to you on those two scenarios, just because in the one case, it wasn't specifically a bicycle-related
There's a
design
bicycle
flaw.
lane and a bus lane, and then a vehicle lane. The vehicle lane turns into 2 dotted lines for a left-hand turn, but you cannot cross a solid line to make a right-hand turn.
Might I suggest perhaps Kevin from Public Works can perhaps provide some more clarity on that design flaw, or we can get back.
I don't know if we need clarity on the design. The whole intent here, I don't think it's a matter of nobody wants active transportation. I think it's a matter of, let's go back to the table, and I've heard in the last week, in a week and a half or so, that one department blames the other department for this doesn't get done this way, or this doesn't get this done this way. Why don't we have a round table, pull everybody together, and actually map out exactly what we want to do, and then go after a budget for it? Right? If we look at Finchgate, for example, we have a 600-meter stretch that goes north and south. When the active transportation or bike lanes, whatever one you're going to call it, when we look at Finchgate, 600-meter road goes north and south. The idea of bike lanes was to connect east and west because we have a trail system, a massive trail system that goes north and south. There's no bike lane on Clark, there's no bike lane on Queen, so that Finchgate bike lane doesn't connect to anything. There's no trail system that it connects to, there's no bike lanes on either or. And I know that you had said that the Clark bike lane has been delayed, and I get that, but at the same time, why did we go ahead and do it? And that's really what I'm not challenging bike lanes. I'm saying, can we do a better job to make sure that we implement something that's not only safe for everybody to use, but also sustainable so it's a long lasting? Why are we doing stuff for a year or two at a time? Why not build something that we can all be proud of that's 20 years down the road? I can come back. I grew up in Brampton. I've been here for 50 years. Those trails in Bramalea have been there for 50 years. I used them as a kid. And I've gotten from Beauvais all the way down to Steeles, and for the most part, never even touched the road because you were able to go under bridges. So why not make something that's better? Why not make something that, yes, people around the world can sit there and go, Brampton is the model. That's my challenge. I can sit here and go all day long and, we can say, why not make right-only lights? You can't turn right on a red light. Why are we putting up or using regional resources and putting up pylons when we can just say, don't turn right on rights? It works at Trinity Commons. You have 2 intersections that you can't turn right on a red light. So there's different things that we can add in there. Who issues, when we talk about enforcement, who issues notices to the ones that are riding on the sidewalks? And we're talking about adults riding on sidewalks. Are they being fined? Right? So we're targeting certain individuals and certain groups. We talk about equity. What about the mother of three that has to have an $85,000 job, can't have it here in the city of Brampton, and has to go outside of Brampton, but also has to make sure that her kids need to get to soccer practice or art class or dance class? What about the equity of her when she's got to use a vehicle to get back and forth? Like, I get all what everybody's saying, and I'm not disputing what everybody's saying. Let's build it proper. Let's make it so it makes sense. Let's not just put a bike lane on Finchgate that makes no sense. That's it. I'll show you pictures of all the different things that I have. Nelson and I, and to be fair to the delegates, the staff are amazing. The staff have done an amazing job throughout every time that I've ever spoke with them. Nelson and I have very frank conversations, and it's been good. But I think we're approaching this the wrong way. And to have the same 5 delegates come in and talk about bike lanes is not moving the needle. We need to move the needle, and we need to do stuff that is equitable for all within the city, not just equitable for a small group. And I'll turn it back to the chair.
All right, thank you, Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the delegations for coming in and reminding us big picture wise. And I think it's the big picture that I want to ask about today, because when I think about some of the examples that we cite here that are models for us, what we are trying to achieve, a cycle network that goes from east to west, north to south, and allows someone to get from any part of the city quickly elsewhere. When I look at, say, City of Vancouver, which is, you know, an amazing example of sustainable city that has been working on their cycling network for a very long time. They have a very, there are so many routes that one could use to travel east, west, north, south that quickly allow you to navigate anywhere. And we understand that sometimes with the case, with what we're doing, we're incrementally building a network in pieces, if you will, that eventually, when it's all connected, allows someone to seamlessly travel, let's say if they're just going in a straight line. And fortunately, like Brampton, as many Canadian communities are, is based on the old concession line, you know, grid format. And so those concession lines really, those are the first opportunities that we have for building a very straightforward linear network. And so looking at wards 1 and 5 specifically, I can name off Kennedy Road, north-south. I can name off Highway 10, McLaughlin, Chinguacousy, Mississauga Road. And then going east to west, it's Bovaird on the north and Queen on the south. And in different areas, like Williams Parkway, for example, is one. Vaudon was another one that we identified a long time ago. And when I look at how, say, the City of Vancouver does things, they make sure that there is cycling infrastructure on all their primary east, west, north, south corridors. Someone cited Bogota as another example. We've all sat and listened to Gil Penaloza talk, you know, ad nauseum about the importance of building cities that make it easy for anyone to get around in. I will always speak to residents about the importance of making sure that the road is shared by all. So in Bogota, same thing. On all their principal corridors, and they don't have that rectilinear format. It's a much older city, and so it goes in all kinds of different directions. Crisscrossing, sometimes you have 5 roads crossing all in one area. But there are those, I guess, the principal avenidas, the avenues, where they build the infrastructure and allow someone to go east-west, north-south, and sometimes towards the northeast or southwest, however you wish to go. But what I also note is that those cycling lanes are pretty much exclusively just on those major corridors. And that's what I want to ask about today. So where we put, for example, Councillor Power cited Finchgate. What is the rationale for putting a bicycle lane on Finchgate? Given that Torbram and Bramley Road are adjacent and would allow one to travel north-south. And perhaps, I may not be completely accurate, there might be a creekway that allows someone to go north-south, but perhaps not just right there. But why put a bike lane just in one section when you have that long-term plan to put full separated bike lanes on Torbram and Bramley Road?
Through the chair, I think it's opportunity. I think what we're trying to do is build up a ridership. So, I mean, the quick win would be, when you're dealing with arterial roads, typically that's an EA type project. Like, it's expensive, it's timely. The opportunity on Finchgate was really the fact that, you know, it's adjacent to a school. It's a specific trip type that we really want to cater to, get kids to cycling and walking as opposed to a car drop-off that, you know, results in all sorts of other problems. You know, Finchgate, although it's 600 meters, it also, you know, connects with Glenvale, which is on our program this year to receive a bicycle lane, which would connect to Central Park, which is identified in our program this year. So you can see that, you know, quickly one link can quickly or expand to a bigger network within. So I can appreciate citywide, Finchgate might not play a role, but locally, it does play a role. I think it's important to have that school service, those park service. People have to be able to get to those trails. All of those things that, you know, we learned this afternoon, the Highway Traffic Act, we're a vehicle, we share the road just with vehicles. This is about providing dedicated space specifically for that vehicle type, or specifically for that trip type, and it comes down to safety.
Mm-hmm. So, but when you think about it, even if the bicycle lane on Finchgate were not there, it's still a pathway for bicycles, correct? Because even as one of the delegates noted, cars must share the road with cyclists. So even if there is no protected bike lane on Finchgate, what about the roads that I can't, and perhaps Councillor Power can provide an example. Is there a street that turns off of Finchgate? It's a smaller street. It will probably never have either a painted bike lane or a protected bike lane, but it is still a path for a cyclist to drive down. And what do we do in those cases? Are we putting up signage that tells a motorist that they're sharing the road with cyclists in that case?
Through the chair to Councillor Vicente, so a couple of things there to unpack. When we're talking about building that network, and you know, you were mentioning the implementation of the, you know, kind of the infrastructure, the higher order infrastructure on that concession grid. And you think about it, kind of what we're trying to deliver with, you know, kind of a cycling network is very similar to delivering a transit network, where you've got kind of a spine system, and then you have the little feeders and bleeders off of the bigger roads. The whole philosophy behind the active transportation master plan is based on this premise of a AAA network in all ages and abilities. And when we talk about a road that's in front of a school, you know, sure, someone like myself is very comfortable riding down a road that might not have any lane markings, that's just maybe a signed route or a share road route. But a 5-year-old isn't, or a parent of a 5-year-old going to school won't. So we do look for those opportunities, particularly, you know, in some of these, in some of the older neighborhoods where we have roads that were really over-designed. So when we have the opportunity to be able to introduce those minor elements, so on Finchgate we're not putting in, you know, it's not, as far as I know, protected infrastructure. It adds that little bit of extra friction for people in vehicles to allow it to be better shared, I guess. I mean, we're certainly not at the point that some European cities, this Wohnhof concept, where there's no lane markings, everybody shares that space, and cars will drive 10, 15 kilometers an hour because there's, you know, a mom and her stroller and a cyclist all mixing. We're not there yet. But I think we do have the opportunity to retrofit some of these neighborhoods in that kind of low-cost way and provide those delineated network connections where we can. But then again, hopefully on those higher order corridors where we do have the higher speed traffic, the guidance from, OTM Book 18, best practices is separate that traffic from the vehicles.
100%, right? So then, just to use Finchgate, but if I could use, for example, in my areas, like on the Vauden Street, traditionally, that was a bicycle lane that we put in. We talk about protecting that bike lane at some point. Work was recently done on Vauden, but the lane still hasn't been protected. There is room for a completely protected bike lane there if we choose to build it at some point, but that's down the road, right? But coming off of Vauden Street, we wouldn't put a bike lane on Garfield, but we would definitely want to signal on Garfield that the road is shared. So for Garfield as an example, would we be putting sharrows on that road to signal to someone who turns off of Vauden that they are sharing Garfield with cyclists?
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Vicente, that's a great discussion item too, because that gets into the whole realm of kind of wayfinding. Sharrows as a matter of, not as a rule, but where we tend to use them is to provide guidance where we can't put in a proper facility. We don't intend it to be a substitute for a facility, because again, you're asking someone to share a road, but some people are going to be comfortable with that, others won't. It's not, and this whole discussion really is about, it ends up being about culture and kind of mind shift. And to do that, like those are all essential elements, and we have done them. We do have sharrows on certain roads. Is it on Brisdale, I think, that we've implemented them just this year or last year. So we put in where we can to provide that awareness.
It's a mental note.
And those cues to individuals, yeah.
Yeah, and I often go to Kingston as an example to drop off my daughters at school, and sharrows are very commonplace on almost every little street. And again, where there is a painted bike lane, it's clear, bikes are there. And then where there isn't a painted bike lane or there isn't room for one, the sharrow seems to be like standard practice. And so I would like to better understand at some point, and perhaps this is something for us to sit down and discuss, where would a sharrow be appropriate, and certainly provide that guidance and that signal and cause that respect to exist. And that would be appropriate on a roadway, whereas a painted bike lane may not be feasible, and certainly a protected bike lane would be impossible. And so if we can come to a better understanding of where, for me, it's clear where the protected bike lanes have to go. Like, you just look at the map, it's obvious. But within neighborhoods, we need to have a discussion about how we signal that active transportation is encouraged and must be protected by all who share the road, and where we don't put a protected bike lane or even a painted line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente. Councillor Power?
Thank you, through the Deputy Mayor. So on Finchgate, I can tell you that the neighborhood and the school principal are not happy with the bike lane. So we haven't done due diligence, and I think that's really where I'm going with this. We haven't done the diligence, or we haven't gone out and asked the questions or checked with what's going on. We look at our literature that we send out. You're not supposed to be doubled up or riding side by side in the bike lane in Brampton, but yet we have pictures on our literature with people doubled up in a bike lane. So there's, back to Councillor Vicente's point, there's disparaging information that's out there, and we're not clear, right? Whether it be sharrows or whether it be painted lanes or what have you. The other thing I want to ask in regards to safety, do we have any numbers? So we've put in protected bike lanes on Howden and Vauden, and Hanover. Has that been done in any other municipality in North America? I don't care about Europe or anywhere else, I'm talking North America, right? Has it been done in any other municipality in that sense? And has there been any cars that have been launched over those things because of a high rate of speed causing any type of injury?
Through the chair, first part of the question, yes. I mean, this is by no means a Brampton initiative. Municipalities, London, I gave that example earlier. Hamilton was one of the first ones out of the gate. Toronto still regularly uses, this is a treatment where they're putting roads on road diets and introducing physical separation in adjacent to a bicycle lane. We don't have any data to support, but it hasn't been, I mean, I'm involved in the industry. I sit on the board of directors for the Ontario Traffic Council, so I'm well in tune with this sort of thing, and I haven't heard, I mean, there's not a big, call out about, that as being a risk issue with vehicles launching as a result of these barrier curbs.
What happens when it happens? What do we do then?
Through the chair, hopefully, by the mitigation of speed, we don't have that instance. I think it's, we have evidence to support that every one of our road diets, whether it's in, Charlet, in wards 7 and 8, we have a lot of data to support that, vehicles are slowing down. So the traffic calming and the road diet is working. So hopefully that never becomes an issue. And we'll leave it. I don't know what else to say.
Well, through the chair, I would suggest it would be maybe a stretch. I think we don't want to go down the road of saying that something like a curb for a bicycle lane is the cause of an accident, because we've certainly had situations where it might be a local road, there's a curve, there's nothing there, and we've had stories in the papers of a car plowing into the front window of a house somewhere. If there was a bike curb there, that might actually prevent that, But I mean, the issue there is about why are cars going that fast? I think we've said before in the cases where we've seen our roads are over-designed; they're too wide, and by providing this infrastructure and that side friction, the literature out there and the evidence suggests that we drive slower, and so that's what we're trying to do.
All right, thank you. That was an informative discussion. And one thing I will suggest to staff is maybe, because there was very ward-specific things, that maybe you meet with ward pairings to talk about their areas and maybe any challenges they're having. I did talk to Mayor Brown. If any budget is needed to alleviate some of these things, you could bring it at budget time. So maybe to get ahead of the curve, staff can do that offline. I'm not going to touch this with a motion or nothing. But offline in ward pairings, maybe there's certain things, like a lot of the reference points Councilor Power saying or Councilor Santos and Vicente, I don't know them. And maybe that's more productive conversation done with ward pairings. And then if there's any implications for the budget out of that, then we can address it in time. So now's the time to do that.
I have one more thing,
Oh,
sorry.
Councilor Santos.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, and there's a lot of talk about the budget, and in the briefing note, it also says that the implementation of our active transportation network is behind at the moment. And with respect to safety and actually filling in the gaps for the network so that there are complete connections, because budget has traditionally been one of the barriers. I'm happy to speak as well with the mayor about perhaps expediting or at least catching up and finding the budget to catch up to where we should be in terms of developing our network.
Okay, thank you. And so that ends the discussion. We'll move on to correspondence 11.1. And I have a motion moved by Councilor Tour to receive the correspondence. All in favor? Motion carries. Moving on, we have councilor question period. Do any members of council have any questions? Seeing and hearing none, we have public question period. No questions from the public. So I will go to adjournment. Sorry, did you have a question? I don't want to interrupt. Sorry, I missed it. I was looking over here. I should have over there as well.
My question, I guess, thank you, I'm through the chair. I'm David Lang, citizen of Brampton. My question is for Councillor Power and for Councillor Basante. With regards to the vision of the city that you see happening over the next 15, 20 years as we grow to close to 1 million people, how will the city accommodate the traffic and transportation network if everybody continues to drive a personal automobile? Because the way that the traffic demand management people are telling me is that we already have congestion in this city. We will continue to see continued congestion unless we have a substantive mode share. We are already experiencing in the city of Brampton a considerable embracing of the transit network, and we are starting to see an embracing of the active transportation network. So given that those trends are happening, and at a point in time, and what people are telling me is that if you can get the 7% mode share of active transportation, you begin to see a substantive decrease in the number of road users, because bicycles take up an awful lot less space on the road than cars do. And so I really am interested in, if we're going to continue supporting and embracing this car-based culture that we've had over the past 40 years, then what do you see as the future of Brampton by 2030, 2040, 2050? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I don't see a response, so we'll take that as noted. Any other questions? Hearing and seeing none, we'll go to adjournment. I have a motion moved by Councillor Power for adjournment. All those in favor, motion carries. Thank you.